Hey there, Pond Explorer, and welcome to another deep dive.
Hello.
Ever peered into a pond and been curious about all the green stuff swirling around, or maybe the stringy things?
Or those odd sort of jelly-like blobs you sometimes see.
Exactly. If that sounds familiar, you've definitely come to the right place today. We're going to try and unravel some of those mysteries.
We're diving into the common residents of ponds, and we're drawing from some really great resources over at Texas A&M AgriLife Extension's Aqua Plant.
Yeah, they've got a fantastic collection of info, helps you identify, understand the different types of algae.
And even some things that just look like algae, but aren't quite.
Right, so we've got material that breaks down everything, from the really tiny single-celled things at the bottom of the food web.
All the way up to things that look like underwater moss but are actually algae. It's quite the range.
So our goal, our mission today, is really to get a clearer picture of what these organisms are, where they live, and what they actually do in the pond.
Yeah, the good stuff and sometimes the not-so-good stuff, they contribute to the ecosystem.
And the variety is pretty surprising, isn't it?
It really is. We'll be looking at microscopic drifters, things that form visible chains, even whole colonies of tiny animals.
Animals, okay. It's a whole world in
A
there.
very intricate world, yeah. Looks simple, but it's not.
Okay, let's unpack this then, starting right at the bottom. The foundation. Planktonic algae. What exactly are these?
Okay, so planktonic algae are basically microscopic plant-like organisms. They just drift freely in the water.
Plant-like, so they photosynthesize.
Exactly. They use sunlight for energy, making them the primary producers, the very, very bottom of the food web. Everything else kind of relies on them, directly or indirectly.
Gotcha. So these are the little guys that can actually change the water's color, right? Make it green or blue-green, maybe brown.
That's them. When conditions are right, enough warmth, light, nutrients, their numbers can just explode. We call that a bloom.
A bloom, like painting the water.
Pretty much. It can look exactly like that. Common examples, you might see things like Chlamydomonas, Chlorella, Euglena, we'll touch on that one again, Quasterium, Anacystis, lots of different types.
Okay. And having some of this seems beneficial, right? Food source, maybe some shade. What's the main takeaway for someone looking at their pond?
Well, the key insight is really balance. A healthy pond usually has some level of planktonic algae. It feeds the zooplankton, the tiny animals.
And then feed bigger things.
Right. And like you said, in deeper water, they can shade the bottom, which helps suppress maybe unwanted rooted plants. But
There's always a but.
there often is. If you see a really intense bloom where the water color changes drastically, that can be a red flag.
Why is that? Too much of a good thing.
Exactly. When that massive bloom eventually dies off, the decomposition process uses up a lot of dissolved oxygen in the water.
Oxygen depletion. Bad for fish.
Very bad. It can stress them, even cause fish kills. So yeah, they're essential, but overgrowth, that can cause serious problems for the whole pond.
That's a really crucial point. Okay, moving from the tiny floaters. Filamentous algae. The name suggests we can actually see this stuff.
Oh, absolutely. Filamentous algae are still single cells, but they link up. They form long chains or threads or filaments visible to the naked eye.
And these chains, they clump together.
They do. They intertwine and often form these mats that float on the surface. They can look like, well, wet wool maybe, or even cotton candy sometimes.
That's the stuff people call pond scum then.
That's often what they mean, yes. Examples would be Spirogyra, Anabaena, another name we'll see again, Oscillatoria, Lingbia, Pithophora.
And these mats, they can get pretty thick. Where do they usually start growing?
They often start on the bottom, especially in shallower spots. Or they might attach to rocks, logs, other plants down there.
And then they float up.
Yeah, as they grow, they sometimes trap gases from photosynthesis, which makes them buoyant.
Yeah.
So pop, up to the surface they go, forming those big, sometimes annoying mats.
Annoying, right. So if you see these stringy mats, is that automatically a problem? And do they actually feed anything?
Whether it's a problem really depends on how much there is. A little bit, probably fine. But really large mats can block sunlight.
Stopping other plants from growing underneath.
Right. And they can also interfere with oxygen getting into the water at the surface. Now, food value, interestingly, not much direct food value for bigger wildlife.
Oh, so fish don't eat it?
Not really, no.
Yeah.
But the submerged parts provide really important habitat for tiny invertebrates, little bugs, worms, snails.
And those guys are food.
Exactly. Food for fish, amphibians, reptiles, ducks, you name it. Plus, when the filamentous algae die and break down, they create detritus.
Decaying stuff.
Yeah, decaying organic matter.
Yeah.
And that detritus is also food for many invertebrates, so indirectly, they definitely play a role in the food web. It's more about shelter and contributing to that decomposition cycle.
Got it. Habitat and detritus. Okay, next on the list. Blue-green algae. Now, I've definitely heard warnings about this one. Is it actually algae?
That's a super common point of confusion.
Yeah.
Despite the name, blue-green algae aren't true algae. They're actually bacteria.
Bacteria. Really?
Yep. A group called cyanobacteria, they photosynthesize, which is why they get lumped in with algae. But structurally, biologically, they're bacteria.
Okay, wow. So what do they look like?
Well, they can be single cells, or they can form filaments, those thin, stringy strands, or clump together in colonies. One key thing is they're often buoyant.
Meaning they float easily.
Right. They often rise to the surface and form that visible scum layer or floating mats. And the color can be blue-green, obviously, but also just green, brown, even reddish-purple sometimes. Examples include Anabaena, Aphanizomenon, and Microcystis.
And where do these cyanobacteria like to hang out? What conditions do they favor?
You find them in fresh and saltwater, but the really problematic blooms, those are mostly freshwater issues. Lakes, ponds, reservoirs, slow streams, especially when the water's warm.
Summer conditions then.
Often, yeah. Warm water, lots of nutrients, especially phosphorus and nitrogen, and plenty of sunlight. Pretty common pond conditions in the summer months.
Okay, so they like conditions many ponds naturally have.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned problematic blooms. What are the cons here? I think I remember hearing about toxins.
That's the critical takeaway, yes, the potential for harm. Certain types of blue-green algae produce cyanotoxins.
Cyanotoxins.
Yeah.
Sounds nasty.
They can be. Harmful to fish, certainly, but also potentially to livestock, pets, even people if they swallow contaminated water or have skin contact.
Wow. Okay.
And beyond toxins, they can also produce compounds that make the water taste and smell really awful. Fishy, earthy, foul.
So definitely something pond owners need to watch out for. Seriously.
Absolutely. Water managers take cyanobacteria blooms very seriously for those reasons.
Okay. Let's switch gears slightly. Euglena. The notes say it's technically a protist, often mistaken for algae. What's the difference there?
All right, euglena are fascinating little things, single-celled microorganisms. They do have chloroplasts, so they can photosynthesize like algae, which is why they get confused.
But they're not algae because...
Because they also have features more typical of what we call protists, like a flagellum.
A little whip-like tail.
Exactly, for movement. And a distinct nucleus, a contractile vacuole to manage water. Things true algae don't quite have in the same way. Physically, they're often sort of pear-shaped, really small, like incredibly tiny.
How tiny?
Oh, anywhere from maybe 10/10,000ths of an inch up to 2/100ths of an inch. Very small. They can look green, sometimes reddish because of their chloroplasts, and a little red eye spot.
An eye spot. To sense light.
Yep, helps them find light for photosynthesis. Pretty sophisticated for a single cell.
Huh. And where do you find euglena?
They're pretty much everywhere, worldwide, various freshwater bodies, even moist soils. And like the planktonic algae, they can sometimes form large blooms in ponds and lakes.
And are these euglena blooms a concern, like the cyanobacteria?
In some cases, yes. Certain species of euglena can produce toxins when they bloom densely. These toxins can lead to fish die-offs.
Oh, okay. So another one to potentially watch out for.
It can be, yeah. While they share some traits with beneficial algae, some euglena blooms are definitely a negative sign for a pond's health.
Right, so potential concern there too. Okay, now, golden algae. The name itself is intriguing. What's the story with this one?
Golden algae. The scientific name is Primnesium parvum. It's another microscopic single-celled alga. Floats freely.
What does it look like?
It's usually kind of oval or elliptical. It has two short hair-like flagella little tails, again, for swimming or sometimes sticking to surfaces, and two chloroplasts that give it that yellowish or golden color.
Okay. And the important thing here is...
The really important thing is that it's not native to North America.
Non-native. That often rings alarm bells. Where does it grow and what's the main concern?
Well, it can actually live alongside other algae species without causing any issues. But under certain conditions, we're still figuring out exactly what triggers it. It can multiply really fast and form these massive blooms.
And the water turns golden.
It can, yeah. It might look kind of golden or yellowish brown during a bloom.
Yeah.
But the key thing, the big concern, is its effect on fish.
Not good, I'm guessing.
No, very bad. Golden algae blooms release toxins that specifically target gill-breathing organisms. So fish.
What does it do to them?
Affected fish often show bleeding from their gills, fins, scales. They might gasp at the surface, acting like there's no oxygen, even if the oxygen levels are actually fine. It's the toxin affecting their gills.
Wow. Does it affect anything else? Wildlife, people?
Interestingly, no. The research so far shows these specific toxins aren't significantly harmful to other animals like wildlife, livestock, or humans. It's primarily a fish killer.
That's strangely specific, and because it's non-native.
Because it's non-native, the recommendation is definitely to prevent its spread. Don't move water or fish between water bodies if you suspect it's present. And if it is present and causing fish kills, treatment with a specific selective algaecide is often needed.
Right, definitely something to be aware of, especially that non-native aspect. Okay, let's shift to something a bit bigger now. Musk grass or chara. This one's described as being mistaken for submerged plants. How can you tell it's chara?
Okay, chara. Yeah, it looks a lot like some underwater plants. It's a type of gray-green branched multicellular algae. It can actually get quite tall, maybe up to 6 feet or so in some cases.
6 feet, that's big for algae.
It is. But one of the biggest giveaways is the smell. Chara often has this strong, kind of musty or even garlicky odor. That's why it's called musk grass.
Ah, the smell test. What else?
Texture. Unlike most plants, it feels rough, kind of grainy or crunchy. That's because it deposits calcium carbonate in its cell walls. You might even feel little thorn-like bumps on it.
Crunchy and smelly. Got it.
Yep. And structurally, it has these cylindrical branches that grow in whorls, like spokes on a wheel with smaller branchlets coming off each joint or node. But no true leaves, no flowers, and it doesn't grow up out of the water. It anchors with things called holdfasts, not true roots. It can form these really dense underwater meadows, almost.
Okay. And where does this crunchy, smelly algae like to grow?
It can handle both shallow and deep water, brackish or freshwater. It seems to prefer harder water, water with more minerals, more alkaline, and it spreads easily spores, little fragments carried by water or birds. It's often one of the first things to show up in a new pond or lake.
Is it beneficial at all? Or just there?
Oh, it definitely has benefits. Some ducks eat it, and those dense meadows provide really good habitat and cover for invertebrates and small fish.
So food and shelter.
Exactly. And like the others, when it decomposes, it adds to the detritus, feeding that part of the food web too.
Okay. Now, similar, maybe, is Nutella, also called stoneworts. If chara is crunchy and smelly, how does Nutella compare? How do you tell them apart if they both look like underwater plants?
Good question. Nutella is another branched, multicellular algae, often confused with plants, just like chara. They can look similar at first glance, but Nutella has no smell, none at all. And the texture is completely different. It's soft, almost delicate to the touch, no crunchiness.
Okay, no smell, soft texture. Big difference.
Huge difference, yeah. It's typically a lighter or darker green, and its branches are usually finer, maybe only a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch thick. Still forked and bushy, but just softer. And again, no flowers, doesn't grow above the water.
And its role in the pond, similar to chara.
Ecologically, yeah, pretty similar in function. It's not considered a major direct food source for big animals, but it provides excellent habitat for those small invertebrates.
Shelter again.
Shelter again, yes. And its decomposition contributes to the detritus, fueling that base level of the food web.
Okay. Now this next one sounds really different. Bryozoans. The notes say colonies of small animals, often confused with algae. Animals. How does that work?
Yeah, bryozoans are fascinating. They are indeed animals, tiny individual animals called zooids that live together in colonies.
Like coral, kind of.
A little bit in the sense that they form a colony structure. These colonies attach to underwater surfaces, rocks, branches, docks, even other plants. And the colony itself can look, well, gelatinous, sometimes branching, sometimes sort of lacy.
So the whole structure looks like a blob or a weird growth.
Exactly. And they can get, a few inches across or tall, so you can see why someone might mistake it for algae or maybe some kind of fungus. But if you could look really closely, you'd see the individual zooids.
And what do the individual animals do?
Each tiny animal has this crown of tentacles around its mouth area. Yeah. They extend these tentacles out into the water to filter feed.
Filter feed. So they're eating tiny particles.
Yep. Straining microorganisms like algae and bacteria out of the water for food.
Tentacles. Wow. Where do you find these colonies?
They tend to like calmer waters. Quiet lakes, ponds, slow streams, swamps, always attached to something underwater. You might not even notice them unless you're looking for them.
So are these little animal colonies good or bad for a pond? What's the main thing to know about bryozoans?
The main takeaway is that they are generally considered beneficial.
Right.
They can be a food source themselves for some fish, insects, snails.
Yeah.
But maybe more importantly, their filter feeding helps clean the water. They're removing suspended particles and microorganisms. In fact, their presence is often seen as a sign of good water quality.
Really? So finding bryozoans suggests the pond is relatively healthy.
Often, yes. It suggests the conditions are stable enough and clean enough for these filter feeders to thrive.
That's surprising and really cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so not everything green or blobby is algae. Sometimes it's animals cleaning the water.
Precisely. Shows the diversity in there.
Absolutely. Now, just to give us a bit of context, the sources kind of put aquatic plants into broader categories. Can you just quickly run through those main groups?
Sure. It's helpful for management to think in these groups. First, you've got algae and other plankton, everything we've mostly discussed. The microscopic floaters, the stringy filamentous types, and those larger algae like chara and Nutella that don't have true roots.
Okay, group one.
Then you have floating plants. These aren't rooted at all, just float on the surface. Think duckweed or water hyacinth.
Right. Free floaters.
Third group is submerged plants. These are rooted in the bottom, but most of their leaves and stems stay underwater. They're often kind of limp if you pull them out.
Like milfoil or pondweed, maybe?
Exactly, things like that. And finally, you have emergent plants. These are rooted too, usually along the shoreline, but their stems and leaves stand up stiffly above the water surface. Cattails are the classic example.
Cattails, reeds, pickerelweed.
Perfect examples.
Hmm.
So algae, plankton, floaters, submerged, and emergent. That covers most of it.
That's a really useful framework.
Yeah.
And the sources kept stressing how important identification is. Why is it so critical to know exactly what you're looking at?
Because, as we've seen, ponds are complex. They often have many different types of aquatic life living together, and how you manage or react to each type can be totally different.
Right. You wouldn't treat beneficial bryozoans the same way you'd treat a harmful algal bloom.
Not at all. Some things are vital food sources, some provide essential habitats, some tell you about water quality, and others, like certain algae blooms or maybe an invasive plant, can cause real problems that need specific solutions.
So you need to know what you've got before you can decide what, if anything, to do about it.
Absolutely. Accurate identification is always step one for smart pond management, whether you want to encourage the good stuff or tackle an issue.
Makes sense. So from those absolutely tiny microscopic algae kicking off the food web, all the way to those filter-feeding animal colonies, it's really clear there's just so much more going on in a pond than you might think just looking at the surface.
It really is. We've covered a huge range today: planktonic, filamentous, cyanobacteria, euglena, golden algae, chara, Nutella, bryozoans. Quite the cast of characters.
And they all play different roles, don't they? Some are food, some are shelter, some are indicators.
And some, unfortunately, can be threats to the balance, creating toxins, using up oxygen.
Which kind of leads us to a final thought for you, the listener. The next time you're looking at a pond, even one that looks really still and quiet,
Yeah, take a second. Think about that hidden world underneath. All those microscopic things, the stringy bits, the tiny animals, all interacting. How are they influencing each other? How do they shape the health or maybe the imbalance of that whole little ecosystem?
it definitely gives you a new way to look at it, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully this deep dive has maybe sparked some curiosity, encouraged you to look a little closer next time you're near a pond.
Maybe even try to identify some of these things we talked about.
Yeah. And if something specific caught your attention today, maybe the risks of blue-green algae or the role of muskgrass or those weird bryozoans.
We definitely encourage you to dig deeper into that. Understanding this complex web of life is really key. Key to appreciating our ponds, and also key to managing them responsibly.